Welcome, and thanks for joining me today on Mortgage Manager Playbook, a podcast for sales leaders who want to improve their team's sales performance and originate more loans. I'm Pat Sherlock, your host. Our topic today is really a fabulous one, getting the most out of your personnel in 2025. And I have the perfect expert, Phil Reichers, who is SVP, a National Sales Manager at ServiceLink. He's been a long time within our industry, was at Wells, Annie Mac, and several other companies. Phil, I'm thrilled to have you today about this topic because it's so important.
Hey, thanks for having me, Pat. I'm excited to be here.
Well, let's talk about, we'll go back in time a little bit and talk about how did you get into our business? I always find that interesting. So,
Yeah, it usually is an interesting tale from most people. I don't know if mine's as exciting, but like so many younger people coming out of school, I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I was working at a stock brokerage firm, Pat, and unfortunately, a world event occurred that significantly impacted several industries. They took the last in, first out approach, and I
sure.
found myself out of work. Luckily, I had made enough of an impression on our COO, and his sister just happened to be a recruiter in the financial services industry. So,
Really? Oh, wow.
yeah, so she had two opportunities for me, one of which was Wells Fargo Home Mortgage.
Oh, okay.
I began as a temp there. I had some amazing mentors and 11 years at Wells, and I never looked back since.
Wow, what a story. So, anyway, we'll talk about. I know you just went to the MBA, the annual conference, and talk about what trends you're seeing. And of course, you cover depositories and so many financial institutions. What are you seeing out there? What is the main topics, and what are the things that they should be working on that probably aren't working on?
Yeah, I would say that it was probably the most optimistic I've seen our colleagues in a long time. It was a great conference, Pat. One
Hmm.
of the best in years, not just from an attendance perspective, but the topics, the energy,
Hmm.
the connections that were made. I'd say it was a great job by the MBA and everybody who participated. As far as trends and what I'm seeing in 2025, I think the focus really needs to remain on the purchase market and building and enhancing the relationships that can be consistent referral sources. I don't know that we all do it as well as we should. I think we need to
Hmm.
start thinking more in that direction because consumer sentiment it is improving, and
Hmm.
many have been sitting on the sidelines longer than they probably wanted to, and they're getting ready to buy. So I think the environment there for purchases to continue to thrive in 2025 and beyond is really where the focus needs to be. The interest rate environment, I would say it's still pretty volatile
Yeah.
as rates potentially creep down. Homeownership data it still does not show Pat a large refinance opportunity
Hmm.
for this coming year. For some, first mortgage refinance transactions will still make sense, but home equity transactions probably remain, a bigger opportunity than first mortgage refinance in 25 and beyond.
So, what are some of the things, and you're out there selling every day, that lenders should be working on that are not working on from your viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, it's good to see more lenders, both IMBs and depositories, starting to turn the corner and get into the
Yeah.
black. I mean, I think so many are focused on the right things every day. So let's put that out there. Our industry is also better when everyone's doing well. So we all got to
Hmm.
learn to help each other. I just mentioned, continued focus on purchase referral sources, but I would also say,
Hmm.
uncovering the appropriate loan products to help serve a diverse segment of borrowers, because this is a very diverse segment of home purchasers that are coming in, including that includes, attracting the types of loan officers that can forge those relationships is equally important. It's also a good time for lenders to continue to focus on how they lend and do business. There's never a bad time to reduce costs, increase speed, and enhance your borrowing experience. There just isn't. That can start with maybe looking at your partnerships and acknowledging that sometimes, less is more.
Yeah.
I
I,
understand that can lead to some tough decisions, Pat, like reevaluating a tech stack that maybe took months or years to implement, but ultimately, maybe that's the best decision for your business and your borrowers.
well, I'm going to have you come back and talk about that as another podcast because I agree with
My
you. I
pleasure.
see it. I see that every day where they will have like five POS systems and LOS. Oh, it's ludicrous, some of these things. So I think you're exactly right on. So what are some of the priorities that you are having for your team in 2025?
Yeah, so from a professional standpoint, Pat, I want to continue to help as many lenders as possible, with several of the objectives that I just mentioned,
Yeah.
such as reducing days to close, trimming expenses, and improving the bar experience. I also feel like I could do a better job in supporting my own industry colleagues and put myself out there more and help them be more successful. So I'm vowing to myself to make that something I'm going to focus on in 2025. I try to do this daily with my teammates here at ServiceLink, but I want to branch out even more and make
Mhm.
myself available to those in the industry that could use some help. And I'm looking forward to seeing our industry do better in 25 and making those new connections and relationships
Mhm.
throughout this year and beyond.
Well, I'll have to help you start a podcast.
You are the one to learn from. So, yes, I'll take you up
No,
on that.
glad to do that because I think we need to really share our wisdom because this is interesting times to say the least, which I think is a great segue into talking about our main topic about getting the most out of your sales force in 2025. You have handled lenders, you've been a head of sales organizations, you've been on the fintech side, and now on this side. So talk about the sales world and what it is that you do that you find that's effective when it's really a remote world today.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think there's a magic potion
Yeah.
necessarily. I don't think there's a one size fits all for every salesperson. I think it kind of starts with then getting to know your team and kind of trying to figure out
Hmm.
how best to communicate with them. I think every salesperson or every person that works in any organization, they want a few things and they want them, pretty simplistically. They want the correct answers to their questions in a timely manner,
True.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's pretty good one to start with. So if you're good at that, I think it helps. They want you to set the right expectations and provide feedback as needed. Praise can be done publicly and privately. Crucial conversations are only done privately. I mean, I think that's how you start to build trust with your team. You have to be able to provide them, helpful information that can actually help them do their job. Every time I get on with either a customer or a salesperson, I always say to myself, how can I add value to this conversation?
Hmm.
Ought to always be able to add value, whether that's a 5 minute conversation, 10, 20, 30 minute conversation. You've got to be able to do that. When I speak with my team, and maybe they'll laugh if they listen to this podcast, I would say I don't try to create work for them ever. I try to have them leaving the conversation as if I took something off of their plate. I think
Hmm.
that's the kind of thing that most people in not just in sales are kind of looking for from a leader. You've also got to be an effective listener. I use the term with my team, I always say feedback is a gift. I said, and if you treat it as if it's a gift and you accept it and you embrace it, you can give me feedback, I can give them feedback, and it becomes a true partnership when you're working with a team. And I think if you do those things that I kind of just described, I think it kind of helps to motivate them. Because if you hire the right people for the job, you got to let them do their job and work.
Well, that's all a great point. Let's dive deeper a little bit. And I love the part where you said about setting expectations. Many times, what I see with lenders is that they really don't do that, and they think they're doing it, but they really are not. And I think a lot of times, especially in our remote world, the salespersons, especially the ones that are struggling, they're not sure what to do. So, talk about the setting expectations. How do you do it? How involved is the person that you're trying to set the expectations? Is it particular to them or is it just a group expectation? Talk about that, Phil.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think too often it is just done globally and there's no
Hmm.
feedback from the impacted individual. I don't think that's the
Right.
way to do it. I think it has to be a collaborative discussion. I think there are individualized goals based
Hmm.
on, maybe the market that they're in, based on their sphere of influence, based on their longevity in their
Sure.
current role. I think
Hmm.
all those things factor. And then I always bring the metrics into it. I'll look at all the forecasting that goes on and I'll say, okay,
Yeah.
based on your market, based on what the forecast is for interest rates. This is what is possible. I think you always have to set a goal that's mutually agreed upon,
Hmm.
but that is
Right.
also realistic, but also challenging. And that's kind of the problem that I think a lot of people face. But that's why you've got to have an open dialogue about it. And you got
Hmm.
to explain this is how I got to the number. Do you agree with the number? Do you think you can get to this number? And this is how me as a leader, I'm going to help you do it with me.
So, Phil, in other words, when we get to the numerical component of setting the data points, but are you having a development conversation before that? Because in order to make those numbers, let's say you need to be now more, I don't know, Zoom proficient, or are you having those conversations before that conversation happens on the actual numerical side of it?
The way I would typically do it with, especially if they've been there for a period of time,
Mm-hmm.
a tenured employee, I would probably start beginning with looking at past performance,
Mm-hmm.
seeing how they either hit up above or right on for the goals that were provided. I would compare the markets of the previous years with what the forecast for the current year.
Right.
I could kind of come along with something along those lines. With the newer people, it's probably more to what you described, Pat. And you've
Mm-hmm.
got to really have that conversation to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are and where their opportunities exist, and then maybe craft a goal along the way.
So when you talked about the feedback side, research says is that top performers actually like what would be perceived as negative feedback. They want to get better, whereas other folks want positive feedback. So how do you handle that issue? Is that something that actually you see that the top performers, they're motivated, they want to do the next thing, and so they don't want to hear everything sunny in Philadelphia. They want to hear they want to hear things. How are you going to how do you handle that?
Yeah, as a leader, you cannot be afraid to have the crucial conversations. And
Right.
and I, and I think a lot of times you see these top performers, and sometimes they're coddled by their previous
Yeah.
manager, and they're not told maybe what they need to hear.
Yeah.
I always take pride, again, I said about adding value and also saying feedback is a gift. It's not negative, it's not positive. It is a gift if you're willing to look at it that way.
Hmm.
Um, I think if they're open, and to be a successful salesperson, you're probably a highly intelligent, hardworking type individual.
Right.
But if you're open, and I feel like I, as a leader, can add value to any conversation, I think we can uncover something together. But you have to have the openness to do that. And that probably starts with the leader earning the respect, trust, and the privilege to try to understand that high performer's business and to try to show, look, I'm here to help you and partner you and take you to the next level.
So, how do you handle this issue when you come into an organization, and you've done this, I'm sure, several different times, where you're replacing somebody that maybe wasn't that great of a manager, wasn't that great doing their job, and that's why you're replacing them. And so, and that the team, how do you get them onto your side?
I think it starts with listening, Pat.
Hmm.
I don't think anybody wants to have any new leader come in and just say, this is how it's going to be. Things are going
Sure.
to change. I mean, change is fast, transition is slow. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you've got to understand that as a leader, and you have to have that emotional intelligence to understand, look, there's going to be people in different spectrums of that transition, and you cannot necessarily deal with everybody the exact same way. But it starts with listening, because if you listen, you can at least understand maybe what their needs are, how they feel about the change in management, and where they think that things should go. I always ask a lot of questions when I first come into a role. I usually do it individually,
Sure.
um, with everybody. Sometimes I even send out, like, this is kind of corny, I guess, but little questionnaires, just trying to get to know them on a personal level. And then I reply with things about me personally, and we
Mm-hmm.
kind of get to know each other that way and see where maybe some commonalities exist. But yeah, a lot of listening, a lot of gaining feedback, taking a lot of notes and incorporating them, finding out where the similarities are between each team members and their comments. I
Hmm.
remember at one position I had, and I was meeting everybody individually as part of my training schedule. And there were certain comments that stuck out with so many of them. And
Right.
I made a mental note, and I'm like, okay, they were very clear. They did not like this.
Hmm.
I need to at least figure out a way to change that as one of my first objectives on this job.
Yeah, I remember going into an organization and they'd never announced that I was taking over, and they thought I was a temp. And so we have seen that. And so we'll talk about this issue of how do you move the people that might have thought that they should have been promoted and gotten the job? I mean, those folks are always a challenge.
Yeah, so you have to be honest with them about
Hmm.
why a decision is made.
Sure.
And you've got to stick to it. So, unfortunately, people are going to want to get certain roles, but sometimes those roles can only go to one person.
Sure.
And it could be multiple people that are deserving of the opportunity. And it's unfortunate that only one sometimes can get it. So with the people that cannot get a particular role, you've got to make sure that you figure out another way to motivate them. That could be a multitude of things.
Hmm.
But it's not always easy because you're going to lose people.
Yeah.
And you know that when you're making those tough decisions. You know that if you promote one versus another, you could end up losing a good employee. But you have to make the best decision for the organization and the team at all times.
So the issue of remote workers, talk about that. I mean, certainly in the past, when everybody was in one place, that was one thing, but now it's not that way. And how do you keep the team basically in a positive frame? And what are some of the things? How often do you meet with them? What is it that you need to do that keeps the remote worker, still on target for meeting their goals and exceeding them?
Yeah, and I would say, thankfully, it's gotten a lot easier post COVID, right? Because everyone has kind of become
Yeah,
a little more adjusted to a remote workforce and using, Teams, Zoom, or whatever means that
sure.
you kind of feel like you get to know people a little bit more now than maybe pre-COVID you did when it was all face to face and no virtual calls. But yes, the human connection is not as easy as it used to be. So one thing I try to do with anyone that's ever been part of my team is, again, I try to eliminate barriers for them rather than creating work for them. So usually when I call them, I get a pretty positive response, which I'm thankful and knock on wood. I hope that continues throughout my career. Typically, since we're not all together anymore outside of conferences and things like that, I typically meet with my team, everybody, once a week for one-on-ones, and I
Oh,
go
okay.
through various topics like pipelines, top 100 accounts, account management. Did you see this announcement from
Mhm.
Housing Wire that came out? Did you see this? This integration just got completed. Who do you need on that system? And that kind of thing. And then I leave at least the second half for really just an open forum. Let them
Mhm.
ask, talk to me about whatever they want to discuss. And to my point about they're willing to take my call, I check in with people throughout the week. I know, like, I was sending a salesperson to a conference. I may not be there. I'll text him or her in the morning. Hey, safe travels. You're going to do
Mhm.
great at the conference, doing things. So
Mhm.
not just the visual of a Teams or something like that, but text, phone calls, emails, and I'm sure to acknowledge them when we get together with the big group settings as well.
So how often are you having the group settings now? I mean, certainly you're doing your Zoom meetings, but how often do you actually physically get together?
Not as often
Mhm.
for just that. So since we do travel a lot in the sales
Sure.
world for conferences, we do get to see each other fairly frequently.
Mhm.
We have a very large group here at ServiceLink that are spread out, throughout the nation. So it's tougher probably to bring everybody together, but we do find the time to do it. And when we do it, we make it informational and fun at the same time.
So on the remote side, are there, in other words, when you're having the group meetings and you're doing them, I assume once a week also, in addition to the individual meetings? Is that correct?
To me, that would be a little bit overkill. I think that's a lot.
Yeah, I would
Um,
think, right.
the one-on-ones are more
Important.
weekly, and I'm flexible if people need to, end early or start later or even move it. And then the big group meetings would probably just be one.
Once a month, okay. Is there anything that you do in the group meetings that are fun activities, or these are just training activities?
I'd say it's a combination of both. You got to keep it
Mhm.
lighthearted, right? You've got to have
Sure.
people, when you're pulling salespeople away from customer calls, prospecting calls, their immediate reaction is that's not that exciting, and that's not what they'd rather be doing with their
Yeah.
time. It's just kind of the way it is. So we've got to make it fun. We've got to make it interactive. We've got to make it educational. And again, back to the thing about add value. So we'd like
Mhm.
to bring in guest speakers
Mhm.
quite a bit, some internal, some external,
Mhm.
subject matter experts that maybe not even are from the mortgage space. Maybe they're going to teach you some sales tactics. Maybe they're going to teach you, something else that you might be applicable to the global economy and help you with your job in that way. Yes, we do try to do that here, and I've tried to do that throughout all stops I've ever had.
Well, that's really a great strategy. I do think not enough lenders do that. So we're getting near the end of our time together. Talk about how you see 2025 and from a personnel standpoint, some of the things you're going to institute.
Yeah, I mean, we're always growing here. I never turn my back on talented people. If there's an opportunity to add a
Mhm.
talented individual or a talented team, that's the strategy that we would take, and we would act on that. From a lender's perspective, I think they're all kind of doing the same thing. You see, there's a lot of mergers, a lot of acquisitions that are probably going to
Yeah.
into 25, and I've seen charts over like the last 25 years, the top 10 lenders, and you see there's not as much commonality as there used to be. Every 5 years, there seems to be a
Yeah.
new entrance into the top 10, and I think that's going to continue from the 2025 to the 2030 as well.
So talk about some of the priorities and the takeaways for our listeners today about 2025 that you think is really important.
Yeah, you've got to stay strong. You've got to continue to focus on purchase, home equity, and the correct partners for your company. They are out there. You just got to sometimes invest the time and take that meeting that maybe you wouldn't necessarily take in the busier times. I think you got to hear all these potential partners out, because you never know what you could be missing, and there's never a bad time to improve on something that is already working, even okay. There's never a bad time to improve your organization.
So, Phil, how can our listeners get a hold of you? And certainly, I highly recommend you talk to Phil. He sees lots of lenders and sees what works. And so that's worth a weight in gold for sure. So, how can they get a hold of you?
Easily, because I'm a salesperson, I'm highly responsive. So you can reach me on phone or email. My cell phone is 703-966-8369, and my email is phil.reichers@sbclnk.com.
And also connect with them on LinkedIn. And so I highly recommend that. And so, Phil, I want to thank you for sharing all your wisdom today. I have to have you come back. We have more topics to talk about. And I want to thank our listeners and certainly highly recommend if you would like to hear our weekly podcast, subscribe at patsherlock.com. And I have a new YouTube channel. Check it out at YouTube at Pat Sherlock 1. Thanks so much, Phil.
Thank you, Pat, for having me, and have a great day.
Thanks for listening to Mortgage Manager Playbook. You can catch up on all our episodes by subscribing to receive each week a new show. Don't forget to share this podcast with your friends and team members. If you're looking to increase production, call me to discuss my prospecting sales training program, Ramping Up Realtor Referral Sources. Check out my website, www.patsherlock.com.